Welcome everyone to another day of the Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual campus conference. Boy, it's too early for me. Uh, I'm somebody else. I'm not Bob Ailes. I'm not your moderator. Uh, uh, we have a really interesting session called Unheard, including student voice in course design. We have with us Becky Cottrell, who is the online and hybrid course development analyst in the social work department at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And she works with faculty to develop online courses and to incorporate inclusive pedagogy in online spaces. We also have Ann Oberman, who is an associate professor of social work and the online education coordinator also at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And Ann loves talking with students about digital ethics, social work in a digital world, change and technology, and looking at social problems through the lens of social media. Now, that sounds interesting, and with probably a zillion different angles to that. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Becky and Ann.
Well, thanks, Bob. We're really excited to be here today. Thank you all for being here with us. We're excited to talk about student voice in course design. And we want you to know this is an interactive session. It was designed as a workshop and we decided we didn't want to change it. So be prepared to drop some comments in the chat. We might do some small group work. We've got a lot of interesting things planned today. So our first step is we want to open up with a question for you all, which is who and or what are the voices that have inspired your teaching and learning journey? So we would just love for you to pop that in the chat if you'd like, or come off mute and share some of your thoughts. But how did you get started? What are some of those voices that have been in your head inspiring your teaching and learning journey? Thanks in the chat, Shelley saying other faculty, professional development presenters, and students, current and past ones. That's great. Dan said her fifth grade teacher who had them learn and throw footballs around the room. He always said learning should be active. Oh, Elena, you've always wanted to be in education and have just really enjoyed design. Glad that you're here. Was there any one person who's inspired you or a group of people?
You mean like those voices I hear in my head all the time?
Those voices too, Bob. Great past professors. Man, and that's great. Your Italian teacher who spoke Italian to you from day one. My background is as a Spanish professor, and I'm definitely the person who speaks Spanish from day one. Eva, I love this. My college professor saw my potential and never stopped encouraging me to pursue my passion for teaching. That's really lovely. My voice has always been Miss Hart. She was my first grade teacher, and always that active learning, always encouraged me to go into teaching. I'm not sure that this is where she thought that I would end up, but we recently got to visit with her, and she's just lovely. Excited about that. Again, your father who had a business card that said professional student. I love that. I need one of those. Great. Anyone else? We just have started thinking about voices in course design and those voices that have inspired us. Sometimes in traditional higher education, we don't have as many voices at the table as we might want. And so we're just excited to be able to be thinking about who are the voices that have impacted us and how are we increasing the number of voices that are impacting others. So that's where we are right now. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. We always find it interesting when we talk with students or you all and how many of these voices have stuck with us throughout years. And so I'm thinking Becky, who said first grade teacher, people said fifth grade teachers, you know, your parents, these voices matter. And that's where our why came from. We at MSU Denver, we have students that are coming back to school after long pauses between school. We have parents, we have folks that are refugee status. We have a lot of different students and voices, and how they've been heard in their educational journey really varies. But what we notice is that we needed them to participate in knowledge in the classroom. And then it started creeping into, well, they're not part of the structure. They're not part of the design of what we're doing. And so our why, like what motivated us to really investigate in our department and then to actively pursue student participation was really that we believe education is everyone coming together. So students, faculty, designers, staff, creating together, learning together, but also, again, creating knowledge, contributing that knowledge to the larger body, whatever that is. For us, it's the social work profession and academia, but then also designing those structures, because we can bring the knowledge in, but if the structures aren't created with student voice, then ultimately they're not reflecting how students learn. They're not reflecting how students engage in that process, and we highlight and empower them. So we found that this was kept coming up to us, that it wasn't enough for us just to get feedback from students at the end of the semester. And so that motivated us to start some projects. And Becky coming on board too, having an internal designer and curriculum expert, really helped that energy and time. But I'd like to talk about some of our projects that we've done to follow up on this why and our vision here, which was we created different ways that students can get involved in design. And just to start it out, so far we've had 35 students actively participate in 22 different course designs. And that's occurred in these 4 different areas. And so we run a summer course design institute. Becky runs that for our department. And that's a 2-week-long program where faculty engage in the morning with designing a course. It's very pedagogy grounded and mission kind of grounded as far as we want equity in our course design. So what does that look like? Some of that is faculty trying to seek out new voices, new ways of doing projects, maybe doing a different way of grading that makes their course more equitable. But the other piece is we have students. They have to identify a student in order to participate in the institute that they use throughout the process. In the institute, the student is a little bit more of a consultant. And so that faculty can use them to like redesign a certain project with student voice. There is one example that Becky worked with a faculty member, and they just did a video describing a certain assignment because they felt like that assignment was not clear to them at all when they took the course. So we have students that are involved, and they are more of a consultant in the institute. The second piece is design collaboration. And so Becky designs courses with faculty over a semester, and students are involved as well in that process. Becky has student workers that are kind of, I don't want to say generic, but they go in any course. But then also that faculty member identifies a student who has taken the course with them. So they are familiar with the course, and then they consult as well. The third piece that we did was a course design independent study. And so this was the most intensive piece, and we're doing our research on that right now. But we had 2 independent studies, so a full semester long. Another faculty, Dr. Kay Scherer, designed a course for our graduate program, LGBTQ folks in social work. And then I designed a course for the undergrad program, spirituality and religion and social work. And we both really wanted student perspectives because these courses were so individualized and specific to our students, and we needed more voices than just our own in designing these courses. So we partnered with 4 to 5 students. Kay had 5 and I had 4 in this semester-long independent study. We met every week, and so we were delving into content, into design. Becky helped us design our course shell for the independent study, but then also guided us around design justice principles, which we'll be talking about here in a minute. But we were meeting weekly, so it was like a regular course. And so not only did the students learn how to design, they learned the backdrop of Canvas, and they all said, like, I'm such a better student now that I know the LMS in this other way. They were in there actively designing, choosing and selecting content, and we were having that discussion weekly. And then finally, we're doing research. So we're looking at the perspectives of students as design collaborators. So we're seeing, what are they getting out of it? How is this benefiting them? One of our students, and I don't know if this is going to be a quote later, Becky, so I'll just preempt it, but just said, this is the first time I saw social work in action. And granted, this was a senior in our program, so it's a little bit depressing, but the fact that the way that we collaborated and came to the table, we talked about knowledge production and epistemic injustice and whose voice gets heard. And so it is a powerful, powerful project. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these different ways that we engaged.
But our unifying theme was that we built them based on design justice principles. I know this is a text wall of a page, and I don't usually prefer to do that. And if you would look up, do you have the link for design justice principles, and pop that in the chat so people can view it? We'll highlight a few specific ones here in just a minute, but the basic concept is that the design justice principles were created in 2018 by the Design Justice Network. They aren't specifically related to instructional design, but when we were introduced to them, we really felt like they applied in higher education and in an instructional design setting. So the goal of design justice in general is to highlight the voices of people who are typically marginalized and excluded from design decisions. And we felt like that was so important and relevant as we were talking about course design, that you look through some of these and we're talking about, how are we using design, number one, to sustain, heal, and empower our communities? How wonderful if we could be doing that in our course design process. So we have really looked and dug into these design justice principles as a framework for our work with students. And we want to highlight 3 of those that have really stood out to us as we've done this work. So let me, Anne, I think you've got the first one. Do you want to take that and talk about why it's meaningful to you?
You bet. So principle number 3, we prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. This just really broke down some of my assumptions. And also, I often designed a course with my intentions and how I thought it came through, and then realizing that actual impact on my students was different than my intent. And so the way I was designing it, I mean, I'm almost 50 years old. I have a different cultural construct within my age group, everything. And so like, I just realized that I was not reaching students the way I wanted to, despite my intentions in designing that course. And also when I would design courses with kind of traditional designers, some of the ways that we were using, whether it was more of a QM rubric or kind of a checklist in those ways, they were not bringing students to the table in an equitable way in that co-creation of knowledge. And so this just helped ground me that I wanted to prioritize my impact on my students and then the social work community at large.
Thanks, Anne. These are the 2 that really stood out to me, and I'm pairing them together. So principle number 5 is we see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert. And that one was a hard one for me in a couple of ways, because I am the designer. Asking myself to step back from an expert to being a facilitator was hard. And at the same time, I've actually had some course design experiences with a course designer when I was a faculty member that were not as positive as I would have wanted, that they definitely set themselves up as an expert and didn't want to listen to what I had to bring to the table. And so it was something that was both a struggle for me and something that I really embraced in the design process. And that combines with number 6, which says that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience. And I love this ending part, and that we all have unique and brilliant contributions to bring to a design process. And so being able to step back myself from that expert role into a facilitator role lets me bring those unique and brilliant contributions from faculty and from students into the design space. So that's been something that's just been my ongoing area of growth, is pulling back to that facilitator and leaving room for the brilliance of other people around me. And it has been so rich to work with faculty like Anne, our colleague Kay, and many, many other faculty on about 22 projects that we've been able to work on and bring some of those things to light. And then, of course, the principle that has really inspired the work that we're talking about today is principle number 2, which is we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the design process. As we were looking at these principles and talking about them, we said, wait, who is most impacted by the outcomes of an instructional design process? And the answer was our students. They're the ones who absolutely have that impact in their lives. In their courses, in their grading, in their programs, and eventually in their professional lives. And so we stopped and said, how can we start bringing student voice into this space? And that's how we were inspired to do all of the things that Anne has talked about. And it has been such a lovely process for us. We've learned a lot. But what we want to talk about today is, what has that process been like for our students? So let's take a next step and see where we are. Anne, I think you're going to take this one.
Great. And so as part of our research, we've been doing focus groups. And so we're going to have some quotes here in a minute from hearing those unheard voices from our students about this process. In the centering student voice, I just want to go real quick touch on that number 2 principle. You know, we do a lot of student feedback. We did midterm evals, we do a final evals. But we found that that wasn't centering the experience or centering the design. It was really contributing and helping us improve courses, but it wasn't centering their voice. And so you'll hear in these quotes how impactful it was to change that up in not just feedback, but how do we do that in more creative and impactful and just more intense ways. So the first one was a student voice about confidence and empowerment. So students that participated as a student design collaborator talked about increased confidence in feeling empowered as both learners and knowledge creators. And so Becky, if you can, thank you. One student said, it was empowering as a student to also participate in my own education. Again, think about like would be our goal every single step on the way, but it was this process of designing that made them feel like they were participating. Doing this has really increased my confidence and my ability to be in this field honestly, like in all ways, but especially like maybe teaching someday. This was not a unique comment, to be honest. Many students talked about, maybe I could get my PhD, maybe I could teach. We had, I think, 2 students out of our group that want to be instructional designers that had never thought about kind of the overlap between social work, social justice, and design. And so again, increasing confidence for their future potential. And finally, here's a glimmer of hope that if you just show up authentically in the space, and you pursue the thing that you're interested in, and you are 100% yourself and just ready to meet the moment, it can be amazing, and it can be exactly what I need in a profession. This was a student reflecting on this experience and how their voice was reflected in this experience. So again, this student is talking about being 100% themselves. Yeah, it just still gives me shivers. So this was one of the themes. Our next theme, Becky is going to talk about.
We were really excited to see that mentorship and relationships with faculty was one of the things that students felt they developed in this process. As we know, those relationships with faculty are a significant learning experience, and having a relationship really has strong impacts on retention and graduation rates. So that was one of the things that students brought up in their course. So our first student said, I am confident the faculty member influenced and impacted my life. And in turn, with me getting these jobs, you're impacting my husband, you're impacting my family. That relationship they were talking about was causing generational impacts for them and for their students, for their future generations, their children, their children's children. So not just participating in this made a difference for them right now, but they were saying generationally, it made a difference for them in getting jobs and in having that relationship. Another student said, it just became a mentorship almost for me. Like I have someone in my life that I could turn to about education. And this just kind of occurred naturally because we're more partners in creating the course. Students found that they were partners with faculty as they were invited into the instructional design space and were able to make those contributions. And finally, but through this process, I feel like I've gained a lot of skills in myself and then also made a lot of connections with the faculty member that now I'm planning out the road to PhD. So as Anne said, we have students who started in instructional design, they're master's students, they're bachelor students, and now they're thinking about how they can get into higher education. They're planning a PhD and really impacting their career. So those relationships with faculty were really important to them as they moved forward as part of this project. Anne, do you want to take our last theme?
Yeah, and I want to just reinforce some of what Becky said too, is we do a lot of work with faculty mentorship in our program because we have a lot of first generation students. And so this is a goal, and yet them designing the course took this up a notch. Many of these students already had connections with faculty. They were pretty active, but it took it up to say like, oh, I could be like you. And maybe that's, we showed them behind the curtain a little bit of what we're doing, but it was amazing that even though they'd have a lot of that other effort around mentorship and being present in the classroom, that co-creating changed that. So finally, one of our final themes that we're sharing today was just about how they are able to shape the future. And so one of our students said, having had already such a great experience in the course really helped me envision, again, so they took the course first and then the design, helped me envision what I wanted future students to get out of it. My biggest hope is that they would have an experience like I did. Many of the students talked a lot about how this course would affect the students taking it in the future. My group made videos talking to those future students. Kay is the other instructor that did the independent study with the more intensive design. Also, they had little vignettes about their bios, and they created their bios again to speak to that future student. In the one-off course kind of consultation, students redid assignments, they did videos, more so that those future students would have an amazing experience in the class. So really shaping that future. It really felt like I was contributing something, like I was leaving something behind for the next group. This just felt like a tangible way that I kind of left my mark on the program. Again, just impactful for that future. I feel completely confident in doing this work to apply literally what I just learned in a curriculum for the next generation who's coming behind me. And these are all from different students. And so this theme of, first of all, wanting to contribute and leaving something behind for the next generation of students often didn't figure into the way I had students participate in class. I was so much thinking about them in their future and what we were giving them, that their contribution actually had a huge impact, that they were contributing, that they were giving something back. It wasn't all about taking, and that really impacted their success in this program. So those are the student voices that really shone through for us in this process.
It's been really exciting to see what students have shared about their experience, and just so inspiring for us to know that students feel like this participation has been having an impact on them. So our goal at this point is to, we want to do an activity with you, but instead of breaking it up and doing the activity right now, we want to leave room for questions now so that we can dive into a little bit of a workshop activity here in just a minute. So we'd love to leave some time for questions, and then we'll dive into an activity.
And feel free to ask about the projects we did, any of those specifics, anything that you have curiosity about.
I'm going to stop sharing for a minute just so we can be here. Megan, it looks like you've got a question in the chat. How were students picked for the Institute?
Yeah, so there's a couple different, so for the Summer Institute, which was a 2-week faculty, we call it Summer Institute Design Justice Camp, but it's over the summer, the faculty chose that student. And so if a faculty did not have a student, Becky kind of helped them figure that out. But in general, the faculty had a student that they knew from a class that they had taken with that student before. For the independent study process, which was the semester-long, more intensive course design process, the other faculty member and myself, we reached out to all the faculty and said, do you have students that would like to participate? I had a couple that I knew were interested in religion and spirituality, but we wanted some diverse voices. So we asked faculty, and we recruited those voices and talked to folks, and pretty much everybody that interviewed ended up participating in the independent study. I will say that was one area that students talked about in the research, was to make that more known, because it was so impactful to them. They felt like other students may not have known about it because it was faculty directed, or they said, oh, go talk to this person. So that's one thing that I think we'll do a little bit differently next time, is make more of an open ask. Yeah, for the independent studies, students received their 3 credit. It was an upper division elective for us in the social work program. So they received credit for that independent study that subbed in for one of the social work electives, both at the graduate level and the undergrad level.
Any other questions?
I'm curious, Becky, maybe before we do the activity, going back, I'm just curious which of the design justice principles resonate with people. And so I'm wondering if kind of grounding in that before we go back to the activity too, and more questions, please have them come. But I was just curious which one of those spoke to people. I know I'm making you go back in the. Yeah, Becky, can you put the screen up again of the design justice principles?
Yeah, and I'll just repaste that in the chat so it's right there.
Awesome. So that's the link for the website with the principles, and then we had them up. And I'm just wondering if any of these speak to you all, as far as you read them. Some of these really spoke to us as far as kind of compelling us forward. And so I'm wondering if any of these design justice principles speak to you all. And if so, feel free to share in the chat or unmute yourselves.
I'm seeing a couple in the chat. 3 looks like it's popular with Megan and Shelley. Shelley says that it really puts students at the center. Manon also does that. 3 is a great one. That impact on the community. Let's see what else we have in here. 10. I love this. What is already working? I think sometimes we overlook that and don't center what's already happening. Absolutely. 7, we share design knowledge and tools with our communities. That's one of the reasons why Anne and I are here. We've really committed, those people who've been involved in these projects have been committed to sharing out at different conferences and different places to make sure that we can share with people. 6, as we know, that was one of my favorites. So I'm glad that resonated with you as well. Olga, I would love to incorporate number 1 consistently as well. Do you have any thoughts about how we might do that? And number 1 is we use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, as well as to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. It's a big one. Emotional check-ins are a great way to do that, to bring that to class, getting feedback. Yeah, I love that, Olga. Oh, I think that's one that's going to be an ongoing work for us. Storytelling, oh, that's lovely. Anne, that's up your boat.
These principles, I've taught theory a long time in social work, and students often, you talk to them the next semester or the next year and they don't remember anything. Students keep talking about the design justice principles, and we only touched on them in the independent study, like 30 minutes of a module in the beginning when we were talking about design. In Becky's summer Design Justice Institute, they talk about it with faculty, but the students, again, they get some basics with it. It sticks with folks. And I think with students, this is also a very tangible way of understanding systems, in that the design, foundation, all of these things behind the scenes facilitate much bigger change. And so I really have gravitated towards these, and they've been impactful for students. So yeah, peer mentor students, wonderful. Yeah, providing redesign. Shelley was just talking about how they're using students there.
Mm-hmm.
And they earn some credits. They earn 2 units for the semester. Wonderful. All right, thank you, Becky. I just wanted to hear from folks and see what resonated before we moved on.
Well, I think that that comment from Shelley ties into what we wanted to do with our activity. So let me pop us to that slide. Okay, so we wanted to do a little bit of a brainstorm activity, and maybe given our time and level of engagement here, I think maybe we'll start with this together and see where we get to. So what we want to do is inspire you to really think about how you might incorporate student voice and/or a design justice principle in a new way in your teaching or in your course design. So we just want to think about how can we do that? How can we incorporate student voice? And then we want to maybe push ourselves outside that box. So we're going to do this activity that I'm going to call an out of the box activity. Let me stop this share and open that up. Anne, are you putting the link in the chat?
Yes, the link is in the chat.
Okay. Let me share my screen again so we can do this together. So what we wanted to do is really push, I feel like design justice calls us to think outside the box, not to say what is our most basic level of implementation, but how do we keep thinking bigger and bigger? So what I want us to do is start by sharing an idea about how we can implement student voice in our course design. Does someone have an idea we can start with? How can we involve student voice or another design justice principle in our course design or in our pedagogy? We're going to put that here in the middle of the box. And if you just pop that in the chat, I will put that in there. So let's start with an idea and see if we can collectively work to make that happen.
And it can be an idea that you're not too sure of or that you're just thinking about right now too. Oh, great. Shelley has one.
Shelley, I'm going to put in student feedback. So as I'm working through here, I'm just going to pop my idea in the middle. I'm deleting the text that I had before. So student feedback. Tell me why student feedback is a good thing and how it's implementing design justice principles. This is a really great idea. So let's work on that together. How is student feedback pulling in design justice principles?
I unmuted. Is that okay?
Of course,
Please, yeah, please unmute.
Okay, because
Yes.
I thought to try to type it. Oh my. So I don't know if you're talking mechanisms. So sometimes I will use surveys and sometimes I use reflections because the reflections will go deeper than just the quick little surveys. But basically it's giving students a chance to identify the elements that are working for them, where they're struggling. They can offer suggestions for improvement.
And when you say reflections, are you meaning like in the moment? So like you do an assignment or you had an activity and you're doing reflections right there?
I have a little bit of both. So sometimes they'll have reflections associated with a particular assignment to talk about what went well, and then I have a couple, one midway and one toward the end, where I asked them to think across like several different tools. We've done discussions a couple different ways. Which one resonated with you? Why? Why did you like them equally? One better? That kind of thing.
Great.
Great. And Megan, great. You've got another idea. Let's talk about that one next here. But let's keep digging a little bit with the student feedback. But yes, I love that idea, Megan. Okay, so let's take that. We've got a really solid idea. Shelley's got some ways that she implemented it. She's got surveys and reflections. Let's push that a little bit. So the question is, how can we make that idea either more detailed or more comprehensive? How can we get outside of that box and push it a little bit to make it bigger, maybe more implemented at a bigger level, or more specific to a course? How can we push that outside of our box? If we need some inspiration, we can talk about what are some of the barriers that we might need to overcome, or what are some of the resources. So how can we all work together? How do we take that student feedback and make it more detailed or more comprehensive?
Some of my barriers, I feel like I always feel pressed for time. So I don't know if anybody else, but sometimes those barriers of making it more comprehensive or built in, I'm just like, is this too much? Or like some that time piece. So that can be sometimes a barrier for me.
Great. There's a barrier, but Olga's got a really interesting suggestion. What if we do a focus group on a class? That's perfect. That's definitely pushing this outside the box. So how do we go from an individual class or individual students to a focus group? Olga, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what that might look like? Again, we're dreaming big. We don't have to implement right now, but I'd love a focus group. What does that gain us?
Yeah, I just threw it out there. I've never really done it, to be honest. Just recruiting students from certain populations, backgrounds that I would like to opinion on my course from, and have them browse, give them, of course, like provide either credit hours or stipend for the hours that they would put into that, and have them go through the course within like a month or something. I'm not saying complete assignments and whatnot, but like at least browse through everything, read assignments, how they sound, what perceived challenges they might anticipate doing that, completing it on time and stuff like that. Again, just an idea. I've never done that before.
I love that idea. And that's our goal today, is to push this outside the box. How are we kind of dreaming big and thinking of some new things? If we're not pushing ourselves, then we won't ever implement something different. Perfect. Megan, do you want to pull that up? Because we're going to do this one more time. So we've got the next idea. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this, getting the design recommendations before the course starts?
I was just kind of echoing what Olga had said. Just the way she had said, like, have students read through some different things to make sure it makes sense. It just made me think about like starting the process of feedback earlier rather than in the middle or the end of a course.
Okay. I'm still putting that in here.
Okay. So I love that. I think those ideas all integrate. So we started with a really solid idea of student feedback, reflections, and surveys, which is an excellent way to do this. And then kind of thinking big, we're in that, how can we do a focus group? And then really being intentional about like, let's get that feedback during that design process, rather than our typical, at our institution, we have SRIs, student ratings of instruction. You get it at the end of the course, and that's not always as helpful. So really being intentional about collecting that feedback before the course starts, during the design process, instead of at the end. I love it.
I like the reflection too. A couple people have talked about making sure to give students credit or stipends, or just honoring and paying them, or giving credit for that work. So it's not that free labor. So that is definitely part of that too. So I just wanted to highlight that piece.
Thanks. All right, should we do one more? I think we've got a little bit of time. And I think, Megan, you had an idea here that may be a little bit related to what we've talked about, but is a little bit different. So you had said suggesting topics for a course. So let me pop down to a new slide. Oh, and you've already started here. So student suggestions on topics within the course. Let's do it. Anne, do you want to facilitate this round?
You bet. And so again, thinking about student suggestions on topics for a course or maybe within a course. How could we do that? How do you think that could be applied to highlight those unheard voices? Or how are you already doing that? Free choice for topics on papers. Olga, do you mind just sharing a little bit more about how either you've done that or just that idea?
Well, before doing instructional design, I was a writing teacher, and although I was supposed, so my goal, my CLOs were to teach them certain aspects of rhetoric and argument and how to do all that. So those were kind of the overarching topics of the class. But the papers themselves, applying those principles, they were free to choose whatever topic whatsoever they wanted to do. And my students would always actually ask, double check, like, are you sure this topic is okay? I'm like, yes, absolutely. As long as you logically explain your argument, you can write about anything. So it was interesting, and it looked like it was surprising to students. They were freshmen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that surprise of having a choice and contributing their own voice, even though it's all around the topic that you laid out, but great, that's a great option. Other folks on how to include suggestions on topics for a course, or maybe within the course. I liked the frame when you all were talking about before or after. And so maybe if it helps when thinking about how to include student suggestions, think about timing too. Like, how could you include that before a course, like in the focus group idea, or during or after? Great. So the use of case studies. Yes, for sure. And a lot of these too, you can, just like Olga said, you can, you're applying whatever you're teaching, whatever your kind of competency or goal is in that course, you're teaching that, and then they get to have their voice in creating that own case study or case study examples for that application or their own paper topics. I've seen some teachers do it where students have choice of how they deliver it. So not only the choice of paper topic, but the choice of delivery. So maybe they do a presentation or a paper or a podcast. I'm just reading Ken's comment here. Oh, great. Yeah, we'll respond to that in just 1 minute. I want to keep that because it's a great way to kind of come back full circle. Anything else as far as student suggestions on topics for a course? This sometimes can be, for you designers, sometimes faculty get their feathers ruffled when students are coming in and trying to suggest topics, right? They think that the fact that maybe they're the content expert and what that looks like. And so I like to say, like, you can start small, little things, like suggest one module, you all get to choose, let's vote on it. How does this apply? Or maybe it's a certain movie that applies, or a certain lab, or something different, but you can have some small choices that reflect student choice, that then you also will be able to apply to future classes as well when you hear that student voice. And again, anything else that you feel like with regards to student suggestions on course topics? Ooh, co-teach, for sure.
That's an outside of the box suggestion. I love it.
often with online teaching too, I don't know if any of you have done this in the design, but having different students facilitate the discussion for that week, right? So they might even choose a certain topic that illustrates something, and then they get to choose that discussion. Or not choose that, they can choose a discussion, but then they facilitate it. And then that voice is really loud and they take ownership, and it's great. And they also then say stuff like, why didn't anybody respond until Thursday night? Then they have that view too. So wonderful, everyone. Thank you so much. This was a great. And so I want to come back to Ken's question, Becky. I don't know if you want to field that or if you want me to.
I'm happy to, or you can. Ken, one that comes to mind is we had a student who really loved an assignment. She felt like it was a really practical application for their professional work, but did not feel like there were sufficient instructions. So she shared a video of herself, how she failed on that assignment the first time and how she improved it for the second draft. And students loved it. We saw a statistically significant increase in their scores on their first draft of that paper because she incorporated that video. So we have had students who have done things like that, that we have had a super positive feedback on. Students really love the student videos. Any video and voice that students want to incorporate, everyone really likes. We've also had students request more variety in course materials, so podcasts versus readings, more videos, and we get a lot of positive feedback from that. We also, this is a little more subtle, but we get a lot of students, especially early. We had just transitioned to Canvas when we started this, and students had some suggestions about how to set up features in Canvas so that navigation was easier and more uniform across classes. And it's harder for students to pinpoint that they really like that. And we get a lot less complaints about navigation. And we hear a lot more about like, oh, I'm so glad that's available. So that one's harder to pinpoint. Students don't know that it was another student who asked for that, but we get a lot of positive feedback on navigation. So
there's a student that decided that the reviews at the end of kind of your standard course design module in the LMS, that the reviews were not helpful. Nobody reads those reviews. And so I took them out in all my classes and I incorporated it into the intro, kind of the overview summary. And students have told me, and again, they didn't know that was a student decision. I tell them when they ask, but they say, I love the fact that you just have everything right there in the overview, that we don't have to do the redundant review at the end. So that was something too in course design that really was impactful for my students.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, what redundant review did you say, Ann?
Just a lot of course design has you do like the review at the very end of your module. And so like you put the review at the bottom. So you have your content, you have your overview kind of in the beginning and content. And then there's a review that says in this module, you learned these things. Next week, you'll be going here. And he was just saying nobody reads those. And so we incorporated that into the intro piece. That said, last week you learned about this, and then we went into this week you'll learn about this. And so we made those connections all in the intro and took out that review slide at the bottom. So again, that felt redundant to him again, and that was just one person's feedback, but other students have said that they really like that in my course design.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
thank you all so much. We really just those voices, and we take your voices with us now. Like that's what I love about speaking out. And so Bob, this conference, just all the different voices and participation and people coming, it's such a wonderful way to keep those voices being heard. And we really encourage you to find creative ways to build in student voice, because it pays off for the instructor. It's super enjoyable for the collaboration with the designer and the student. Again, it just keeps rewarding, but then the students really gain as well from it.
well, Becky and Ann, thank you very much. I think you've given folks some good ideas to work with. And that's what we want.
Thank you all. It's been lovely to work with you today. Please feel free to be in touch. We'd love to chat more with you about this if you'd like to. And we really appreciate you coming and visiting and brainstorming with us today.